Hey y'all, I'm just doing stuff to get everything set up. Ooh, already a like. Rita, was that you?
What I do?
Did you like the YouTube video already?
Oh no, I not yet.
Oh, somebody's already on it. Okay. Mad Blackness, Black Madness, Kwudjwa. It's the way.
We're about to have some fun.
Oh
I'm
yeah.
excited.
Kwudjwa, I meant to tell you this. I was talking to my mom like yesterday generally about debate camp, and I mentioned that we had a counselor named Kwudjwa, and my mom was like, that is the coolest name I've ever heard in my life.
Yay! That's dope.
And then she asked me how it was spelled. I was like,
I can't help you with that.
I mean, I can. It's right here.
Yeah, now that I see it now, I was like, I know there's a
Hey, Faye. Sorry, that's the chat on the YouTube. Continue. Don't let me stop organic conversation. I'm just here.
I was like, I can tell you that there's a K, but I
There's
a K.
My thing is that if somebody doesn't know how to say my name, which happens pretty often now, I just tell them to say K instead. And it's always a little bit awkward because then they'll be like, no, I bet you I can say it. Just give me like one more chance. And then they try to talk about it for like 5 more minutes. And I'm just like, yo, back up.
Just say K.
That's pretty much the reason why y'all call me Rita. So yeah, because you know, first name has multiple different pronunciations, and I'm not really rocking with either of them. So,
like the actual pronunciation, you just like don't rock with them.
I rock with my pronunciation because my name is Navaya. And it's heaven spelled backwards, which is like that. But then, like, you know, how people definitely do things with their children's names. And another popular pronunciation of it is Nevea or Nivea or Navia. And I've heard all of them. I think this lady once on a field trip called me NASCAR just to be funny. So
sorry, NASCAR?
Yeah, which don't even make no sense actually. So I don't understand why she did that. But like I just got really tired. I was like, okay, yeah. Middle name it is.
Interesting. Okay. I got no comments other than my comments.
I think she thought she was funny. I think she thought it was a laugh, you know.
Yeah. Super funny.
Right quick, Jasmine, are you wanting me to share the presentation with you? Or
no, you're going to share it yourself. I'm going to make you the host once we get started. I just have to, finish doing some of the sharing stuff that I'm doing. And then once I'm done doing that, I'll start doing what I usually do, which is talk a lot. And then I will give you the floor. We've got a student who's not part of Debate Boutique who registered for this one. So I also want to message them and be like, hey, oh, there he is. Andrew, do you know Andrew Park?
I do not.
Okay, well, this is a student that registered for this. Thanks, Andrew Park. I'm not confused because I know that I'm on a live stream. Very excited to have you, Andrew. I'm not going to say your full name because internet. Okay. But yeah, we're gonna get started soon. Let me just get everything finished.
I'm gonna take 2 minutes and be right back.
That's perfectly fine.
Jasmine, are any of the debates happening tomorrow going to be live streamed?
Would you like it to be live streamed? Don't give me ideas.
That's not my, you know, it's not my call. You know, I'm only asking because my dad in Florida wanted to watch one of my like debates. So he was asking and I didn't know, but you know, if everyone else is comfortable with it, I'd be down.
Okay, I love that. I'm gonna put that in motion. We will be getting started very soon, folks. We're just getting things all set up. We are sharing it. If you have the capacity to, would love for you all to also share this so that we can get this in front of as many people as possible. Because a lot of bars and gyms are about to be delivered. I'm super excited for this. For those of you who do not know who Kwudjwa is, very smart scholar, recent NDT National Debate Tournament, which is a national college tournament that only a certain set of folks get invited to, semifinalist. So they might know a few things. And even though, you know, even if you don't get to semifinals, you can be a very smart intellectual person. I should know. I've never got to semifinals with the NDT. But is overall a very, very smart, great teacher and mentor. So I'm excited for their words and intellect and wisdom on this topic. But we'll be getting started very, very soon. Just want to make sure that I'm getting this to all of the pages. Boom.
Rita, how are you feeling about the KED core?
I'm excited. I'm very, very excited. Definitely on that ratio cap.
Bet.
Hey, feeling excited.
I was hoping that y'all be happy, because if y'all were not happy, I would have been like,
I'm very
disrespectful. But no, I'm glad. The racial cap cards that I put out, a lot of them are pretty new. And I think that they'll give you some interesting takes on how to think about it.
Because, you know, as much as I love talking about infrastructure politics, I was definitely needing some K vibes, definitely.
True. You know, something that I'm also thinking about is that with that, you might want to come up with some diss ads that you might not normally read, and read it alongside that critique. Because I think that with most critiques, you can't really do that, but with racial cap, it might make it unique to go for some linear style disadvantages with some impacts that are not extinction based. Just a thought.
Yeah.
All right, y'all. I'm going to turn my camera on and we're going to get started. I don't know why I also muted myself, but that's fine. Stop share. Cool. Kwudjwa, I'm going to make you the host so you can get set up while I do this little chat.
Where is everybody?
Not everyone signed up, but also some folks are on vacation, which, you know, it's a very fluid scheduling, but we are built for fluid scheduling, so that's completely fine. So we are going to get started. Y'all, welcome back to yet another Debate Boutique workshop lecture. Let me pin, wait, Kwudjwa, can you do me a favor? Can you pin me and you? I forgot. Can you pin
Here and
pin my video in your video?
Yeah, you should be, I think.
Perfect. So long as you did it, I'll trust that. And then can you put gallery view? Because I realized that I didn't prepare adequately. It's the one with all the squares.
Okay, got you.
Perfect. Awesome. But yes, welcome y'all to yet again another workshop lecture presented by Debate Boutique. We are super excited to be doing this summer and hopefully for many summers to come. Y'all know the drill of all the things I'm about to say because they're important. The first being that this should become the new normal. We have all of these resources, all of these big concepts, ideas, big brains in the community that to keep information such as this, like lectures, different skills that we're doing to ourselves does a disservice to students who this is suited for. So let's make this hashtag the new normal and have an info share, because that is ultimately what is the goal to elevate our community. The second is that and I'm going to put it at the top because I put it at the bottom and then y'all don't do it. So at the top is, if you are watching this video, or if you have been sharing this video, thank you, first of all. But if you've been watching these lectures, watching Debate Boutique content, and you are not subscribed to the YouTube channel yet, I honestly don't know what you're doing. Fill me in, but we would love to have the support in hitting that subscribe button, because a lot of work, time, heart, dedication goes to putting together the experience and program and community that is Debate Boutique. And so any and all support, and this is free support, that you can give to us would be amazing, because, like I said, we're doing the good Lord's work. And if you have not followed us on all the other platforms that you have seen on the screen above, and then I later on post on the thumbnail page, is that we have multiple social media platforms. Pick and choose which ones you love to go on. We know that Gen Z, y'all aren't really on Facebook anymore. So, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, we got you. And so make sure that you are following and supporting there, because honestly, the vibes on Instagram are immaculate. I put a lot of work into making sure that it's interactive and fun. The third of four things that I will talk about is that on August 15th, y'all, fall services are being launched. If you are not subscribed to the email list, I heavily suggest that you are. A part of our fall services will be private coaching, but with a twist. And I'm super excited to be able to announce these things as we get closer to the 15th, as well as so many other programs and services from Debate Boutique. This is our second year running the program during the fall, and there's so many things that we have learned, so many things that we are tinkering with to make better. And so make sure that you're subscribed to the email list. You can just go to the website and hit subscribe so that you'll be the first to hear about the limited selection of folks that will be permitted into our community space come August. And the last thing, and this is probably the most important thing that I could talk about right now, is this lecture, you all. I'm super excited for this. I'm going to have my camera off taking notes. This is presented by Kwudjwa Osei, who is a rising senior at the University of Pittsburgh. Y'all have heard me, brag about them a little bit, and so I'll continue to do it. Is a NDT semifinalist, and even before that, a very, very smart strategic mind in this activity. You can run, run the spreadsheet back to last year. They are very talented and are really dedicated to teaching students how to get it. And so this lecture, Mad Blackness, Black Madness, is an argument that they have curated in debate, or have been utilizing in the debate space for a while now, that has popped quite a few folks in the competitive space, and they're sharing that with you today. They'll talk a bit more about it, since I think it's best for the person who put together the workshop lecture to discuss what these concepts and theories are. But you all be prepared for an information bomb. And if you are taking notes, take them, because I think that a lot of valuable stuff is about to be said. And with that, I'm going to stop talking. I had to just have my moment. And yeah, y'all, enjoy.
All right, hi y'all, I'm Kwudjwa. I think y'all know a little bit about me so far, but just a little bit more is that, yes, I'm a senior. I debate at the University of Pittsburgh. In the vein of this argument, I'm going to give this lecture in a little bit different way. I'm not going to be providing y'all with like routinized like definitions. I'm not going to be giving y'all like super like in-depth like theoretical ways of thinking about madness and blackness. Instead, we're going to take it the way that madness and blackness intersect. And to think about that is that madness and blackness tend to amplify one another, whether you're with people that you would consider mad, that you're mad close with, and whether or not that kind of Blackness leads to experiences of madness, which we'll get into a little bit later. But a little bit more about me is that I've had several experiences with disability in my past. I have been diagnosed with anxiety and depression in high school. And in the vein of this, we should also think of the ways in which Black people are not necessarily recognized for their disabilities or even diagnosed in the first place, meaning that when we think about or approach Blackness and the intersection of Blackness with disability, we have to think about the ways in which it might be opaque, the way in which those experiences of being opaque, of your emotions not necessarily being represented or capturable, kind of influence the way that you might experience disability. When coming to create this argument, I kind of started with thinking about how I've trafficked in debate myself with my experiences of disability, the ways in which we talk about, social life, social death in debate, and the kind of possibilities of being asocial, experiencing asociality, right? Moments in which the reality that you experience in debate is going on, and some experiences that people are having during those very moments don't really get represented. They don't get captured as being part of the community. And with this argument, I kind of want to explore how to bring those experiences together, both in terms of making an argument as well as kind of analyzing what happens outside of debate as well. Ooh. I need to go back, my bad. So this will be split up into 3 sections. First is where I'm kind of describing some of the theoretical aspects of Blackness and madness, but more giving you an introduction to how we should think about Blackness and disability. Next, I'll go into kind of the spirit of the argument and how to kind of articulate it or think about it within debate as a space. And then afterwards, I'll have a discussion specifically about the nature of the intramural, meaning debates between Black folk, debates between folks with disability, and kind of debates within the interstices of madness and Blackness that we would not normatively experience under a kind of topical discussion that involves the United States federal government being centered. But before all that, I'd like to read an excerpt from a song that I really like by Mike. It's called No No. He says, started picking up these habits at an early age, getting faded in the madness just to cure the pain. All the times I felt the stabbing on my vertebrae. My brother said, if it's static, just a word away. City shady with a passion what we heard today, but try to take me out this planet, out this world of hate. I took the stage and I was damaged my determined ways and took my lady to a casket out the pearly gates. Now, there's a lot of different meanings attached to just this verse. And, Mike is somebody who work kind of traffics between kind of the opacity of emotions while experiencing grief, mourning, etc. And I think brings that together in this song. And there are a few aspects of madness and Blackness that I'd like to point out in this song, particularly the aspect about madness in cure and pain. These are some very large concepts when thinking about Blackness that kind of get pushed aside, specifically the relationship between curing and pain. As we'll discuss later, Blackness, right, is not really considered in terms of disability very often, aside from pathologizing Black people, right? There are kind of assumptions that Black people are inherently inferior, that Black people do not have the same mental capacities as other people, that we're simultaneously more prone to mental disability and also not being diagnosed. We are more frequently termed as being angry for not really showing emotion in certain spaces. When we do show emotions, it can cause fear, anxiety in white spaces, right? And I think that tends to lead to a kind of need to feel resilient, a need to find ways to kind of, right, cure that pain so that we can move along in the world. And this song kind of details those aspects. Something that we try to explore and debate when making arguments about Mad Blackness is not just resilience as something that we try to perform in debate, but more specifically how we valorize or devalorize certain Black people and what that renders opaque, right? The inability to kind of see or witness those moments wherein we experience pain and we have to find cures without other people knowing, right? And there's the exact usage of the word madness, but right, madness should not be viewed as a static term. It should not be viewed as something that means a particular like aspect of reality, but instead, I think that it follows through with this question I'm about to ask, which is, what can you trust with your eyes? What can you trust about your reality, right? How do you know when you are experiencing an event that is premised on your Blackness, that is premised on experiencing a different reality? Does that make you mad when you're experiencing that? Does that make you angry? Does that pretty consistently that I think that this argument also explores, while also allowing us to kind of delve into those aspects of grief, delve into those aspects that are considered or redescribed as being a source of insanity within the modern world. The last part that I would like to talk about is that kind of last sentence, and took my lady to a casket at the pearly gates. And I'm not going to say exactly what it means, though. I think that this is an example of, that type of opaque mourning. A lot of Mike's songs refer back to lyrics like this. And if you want to like find out more about Mike, you'll figure out what this all means like pretty quickly. But Mike, I think, traffics between madness and rationality in a way that helps us question our ability to really understand what we are seeing with our senses and still have to have a grasp on reality. And we shall talk about that now. So Mad Blackness comes from a book called Mad Blackness, Black Madness by Terry Pickens. It's an excellent book. I suggest everybody read it. But there's a particular excerpt that really made me pause and think while reading the book, which is that Mad Blackness describes the aesthetics of a text that refuses ocular centrism or linearity. In these texts, including but not limited to the ones in these conversations, madness and blackness pervade the structure of the text such that linear renderings of the narrative always do a disservice to the text, and an emphasis on sight forecloses interpretive possibility. Always does a disservice to the text and an emphasis on sight that forecloses interpretive possibility. The reason why this really stands out to me is because of the question, what can you trust with your eyes? Oftentimes, when thinking about other people, when thinking about blackness, there is an emphasis on what we can see, what we can positively render. Specifically, how do we prove that somebody is racist in a particular moment? How can we trust a Black person when something negative happens to them? How do we kind of understand a Black person's disability, right, in the context of normative disability theory when, these subjects are usually white or at least non-Black, right? There are particular examples of there being disabilities ascribed specifically to Black people, such as drapetomania, which during slavery was a disorder ascribed to slaves who were escaping the plantation, as having a mental disorder similar to hysteria that was making them run away, because why would a slave ever try to escape the plantation? And this emphasis on sight and this emphasis on a kind of like linear narrative of progress forecloses the ability to witness madness and blackness in their, I'll call, subjunctive capacities. Meaning, what does it mean to experience madness and blackness from the perspective of someone who is not able to enunciate themselves, right? For somebody whose voices are foreclosed, that cannot be properly rendered, when one's disability cannot be properly seen. What is hidden? What is not seen? What are the types of discourses that we might pervade that cause harm that are not very visible? And Mad Blackness is an attempt to ascribe to those aesthetics to kind of move away from the ocular sight, right? And move away from any kind of linear rendering to kind of open up different ways of interpreting and understanding our realities. Specifically, Mad Blackness operates to delineate the cost of hope in the aftermath of degradation, to expose the interstices and pitfalls of mapping agency onto Black people who have no control or ability to possess or utilize that agency in a way that furthers the goal of liberation or their individual capacity to live for oneself, and to illuminate ways in which Black people generate life through denigration. Now, I wrote this paragraph, and the essential meaning of this is that Mad Blackness puts the question what it means to resist, right? What it takes to resist, right? In a world where that requires the idea of ability, the ability to do, the ability to resist, the kind of agency or the energy, right? What happens when that is foreclosed to us, when we do not have the physical capacity, right, to be resilient, when we do not have the physical capacity to perhaps during COVID go out and protest in the streets, right? What are the things that we are thinking about in terms of Black liberation, in terms of Black resistance, and just Black social life that are foreclosed when we are focusing on, you know, the very visible moments of resistance, right? I think that a very simple example of what is foreclosed by sight are instances in which Black people experience literal physical internal stress from you know, experiences of racism, microaggressions, hearing the N-word from non-Black people, etc. Right? There are instances in which Black people experience like changes in their internal organs. It can be called psychosomatic stress or other terminology, but there is a very specific psychosomatic experience that cannot necessarily be visibly seen or recognized by those that might be non-Black. And this may be considered an instance in which madness is occurring or something that can induce madness. And these kind of are all different among different Black people, right? It is not something that is uniform, meaning that everybody's experience of madness is different. And therefore, there are almost, I wouldn't say competing instances of it, right? But when you are confronted with two Black people that might be in a mad setting or might be two mad Black people, it doesn't mean that they're going to be experiencing the same thing. They have different needs and we have different means of accommodating people. We have different means of thinking social resistance, right? So, right, when delineating the cost of hope, delineating the cost of, you know, degradation, we have to consider not just the immediate things that we are seeing and valorizing that resistance, but considering what might be internally going on for a Black person, what types of trauma might be induced that we cannot see, what happens in the aftermath of suffering, the types of ways in which community is formed, in the ways in which Black people experience asociality, right? You know, and one of my favorite debates with this argument, an argument that we were having was about, you know, the capacity to mourn, the capacity to say names. And an argument that I made, which, you know, I just kind of was saying, was that it becomes difficult to keep track of names over time, right? This is something that might be considered a form of madness, or in another instance, it might be considered a form of ignorance. The, you know, inability to remember names means that you're not with it, right? You're not, you know, down on the streets. You're not willing to be actually there for others, but it kind of ignores that internal trauma that you might have. And this is, you know, not to say that every single instance of someone saying say their name or say your name is like bad, but that there's a question that we have when approaching different experiences of disability, of ability, of movement within this world that Black people have to have access to, that kind of throws agency into question. So when approaching your debates, when reading arguments about Blackness and disability, I think it is useful to think not just through how's the other team ableist, how is the other team anti-Black, because I don't think that's really the point of the argument, but more so what are the problems with thinking through resistance in the first place. I don't think that Mad Blackness even necessarily says that it is bad to be resistive, but that to kind of move towards always valorizing it without scrutinizing the antithesis to that resistance or the underlying motivations for that resistance might actually be just as problematic and reinscribe the very same structures of anti-Blackness that we might be trying to resist. Now, the last part is that I included is that the walls are not closing in, the space is turning into walls. In experiences of madness that I'll call it madness, one could say that the walls are closing in. In terms of anxiety, one can say that the walls are closing in or that your reality is shifting, right, in ways that you don't necessarily have control over, that you are losing the ability to control a situation, everything is spiraling out of control. And many might say that the walls are closing in. When that intersects with other traumatic experiences or other things that can't be mapped on anxiety, one might think that the space is turning into walls, that it is difficult to navigate the space, that there's no way to kind of move your body, right? And that might affect your ability to move in other spaces in the aftermath, the aftermath of degradation, in ways that render someone unable to vocalize what they're experiencing, et cetera, et cetera. And the question that I'd like to pose, and that we will get back to when we come to the intramural debate section, right, is how do we hold each other accountable for moments in which there are voices that need to be expressed or need to be heard that are not present in the room when someone is saying something perhaps problematic or saying something that might need to be interrupted by those voices outside the room. Blackness and disability have a particular intersection within debate. Contemporary assumptions in debate regarding the intersection between Blackness and disability perform the same violence to the Black body through critique as white supremacy performs, by assuming there is a homogeneous relationship to disability that we can easily map onto the quote-unquote Black body. What I mean by this is that there is a move to say that Blackness is always already disabled. You might hear this, or you might even make this argument already when facing like another team reading a disability critique. And, I don't think that it is like violent per se. I don't think that it is like problematic, evil, whatever. I think that we are very quick to assign moral value to arguments in debate when we don't necessarily need to, or at least that might get in the way of the point. But there are problems with considering Blackness as always being disabled, and it's usually a response to a very specific way of talking about disability that assumes, a white person's body, right? If you ever think about the medical industrial complex, one thing that you might notice is if you look up an injury, right, the first results that you're going to get are white. It's pretty difficult to have doctors even diagnose Black people for physical ailments, either because of negligence or because they legitimately do not consider the ways in which Black people experience violence and disability, and therefore do not have the visual, sight ways of registering Blackness. Now, on the other hand, Blackness being always disabled is not a routinized way to think about Blackness, because Blackness exceeds the rubric of disability. When discussing disability, the frameworks of hyper or disability are both applied to Blackness, whereby the disabling of Black folk through material means of hyper exploitation, disciplinary regimes of policing, and the description of mental disorders such as drapetomania or schizophrenia all become examples whereby white supremacy is able to wrongfully script disability onto Blackness and thus render it inferior. In debate, this is manifested as an argument that says Black people inherently experience social and medicalized forms of disability, and thus ableism and anti-Blackness intersect to reproduce one another. In particular, valences of people reading disability theory, as I've encountered it, the argument has become that Blackness and disability inherently intersect, such that any sort of way that you might be ableist or you might be, well, really just ableist, does not usually become an argument about race at the end of the day, would just naturally, magically reinforce anti-Blackness, right? And one might throw out examples like drapetomania or schizophrenia, right? During the 60s and 70s, a lot of more Black people were being diagnosed for schizophrenia as a result of them going out to protest. And it was not that they got schizophrenia from protests, but that there were ideas of paranoia regarding their surroundings that were, influencing them to go out and have these problems with the status quo. If you know what the status quo was, you would probably want to go out and protest, or not if you don't have the ability to, right? But the point with bringing all of these concepts together is that the kind of assumption of inherent disability for Black people mystifies the ways in which we experience both ability as being oppressive and disability as both being oppressive, right? It is not simply that Black people are disabled, but in some ways we are turned into being more able or more hyper able as a way to navigate the world. And that is a separate paradigm that isn't properly theorized, especially when Black people are considered to be opaque, when our emotions are not easily representable within this current society. Now, to properly understand what I've just said about hyperability, we need to have a discussion of fungibility. The fungibility of the commodity makes the captive body, an abstract, empty vessel, vulnerable to the projection of others' feelings, ideas, desires, and values. And as property, the dispossessed body of the enslaved is the surrogate for the master's body, since it guarantees his disembodied universality and acts as the sign of his power and dominion. What does that mean? That was a lot of words. Very confusing, right? I'm not going to go through and give you a book-to-book cover explanation of fungibility in this concept, but the particular ways that you should be understanding this is how the fungibility of the commodity, right? The commodity is applied to Black people within history as being commodities, personal possessions, right? Public property for civil society, for the political society, and in modern day society, how we still traffic with stereotypes or assumptions related to that history, right? And what Saidiya Hartman here is saying is that the captive, the body that is rendered into a commodity, is stripped of any sort of subjective or interior way or feelings or ideas, and instead there's a projection of what somebody wants onto that body or the assumptions that someone wants. Now, if you remember, I was talking about how Black people's emotions get pathologized, how they get written out, how they're not recognized. This is because there is a relationship between fungibility and the ability to extract value from Black people, as well as the ability to kind of script Black people of being disabled or not. And this usually manifests in terms of hyperability. Now, I wonder how many of us have grew up with parents who warned us of having to be twice as good as our white counterparts. Bailey and Mobley make the argument. I believe Moya Bailey is the one who came up with the concept of misogynoir. But in this article, they specifically are making the argument that there is a form of internalized ableism that is specific to Black peoples that has to do with hyperability, meaning the kind of assumptions that Black people have more of a physical capacity to do things, that for some reason we just magically are able to do labor that other people are not willing to do, or that other people would be disabled to do, right? These kind of tropes or scripts are placed onto Black people as well as scripts of disability, and they function to put Black people in this role or position of being, unable to feel pain, of being superhuman, of being able to do the most when others are not. And that leads to very specific political expectations of Black people, either to experience upward mobility, to be vanguards of social movements, to be strong people, to be the shoulder to cry on. And that for us, we need to kind of hide instances of madness so that we can still be valued the same within civil society, right? The kind of problem with both of these framings of Blackness being hyper able or of being disabled is that the framework of disability and ability do not map very easily when we consider anti-Blackness from a position where we do not utilize sight or ocularity in terms of mad Blackness. What I mean by that is that not only do we have to work twice as hard as our white counterparts according to our parents, right? But we also have to make ourselves capable of doing that. We have to make ourselves capable of being able, right, of being able to work twice as hard as others, right? And that's something that I don't really know if disability theory has much to speak on, is the ability to make yourself less disabled, technically less disabled, right? In order to survive, right? In order to experience value. I have like specific examples in mind, right? Like trying to I don't wouldn't say make yourself smarter, right? But trying to kind of fit into a model minority role where you're already like behind because your teachers or other people have diagnosed or have determined that you're like not capable of the same like learning rate or learning curve as like other students. This happens very frequently to like Black students. And, in order to get past that, they have to become like exceedingly intelligent, quicker than like other students, right? Just to have the exact same benefits and access to education, right? These are instances where I wouldn't say you necessarily have to become less disabled, right? In terms of like mental pathology or literally having like missing like, parts of your body or having parts of your body not working. But there are moments in which you have to, put effort into turning yourself into something more able than it used to be. And this is an aspect of fungibility, the ability to manipulate a Black person's body into something that it is not, to fit into the kind of projections of feelings, ideas, desires, etc. of other people. Another example is, putting your emotions down, right? Trying to change the way that you experience emotions so that people are not uncomfortable by you, right? So that when engaging with police who might be racially profiling you, that you don't make a mistake that might make them more likely to incarcerate you, right? These are examples wherein madness infiltrates the way that you traffic yourself in the world and your ability to articulate yourself, because you're already scripted as being either too disabled or hyper able, very capable of, in the case of like police brutality, being capable of killing a police officer with, like a toy gun or a Nerf gun or something in your pocket, right? So these are ways that we should be considering how disability and hyperability might be useful frames, but aren't exactly how we should approach thinking about ability in terms of Blackness. Now, the last couple slides are going to be me talking about the spirit of the argument, how I've kind of come to develop it, and how it has changed over time. Initially, it used to just be a theory argument, not like procedural or whatever, but an argument about, the way that you have written your scholarship is incorrect because it has these assumptions that don't incorporate or don't fit in with how mad Black subjects might experience their reality, and thus is anti-Black and should be rejected. Over time, I've changed it more and more to be a more performative argument. In certain instances, I will make it about scholarship. In certain instances, I'll make it about how do we take up or think about scholarship from a particular vantage point. And most recently, it has been, not even an argument. I have tried to read it in a way where I don't have to necessarily make a line by line argument. I don't have to read an overview as much as, render myself non-opaque or render myself opaque while still speaking to a particular text. And when I say on this page, who spoke, whose voices interrupt the page, right? The question of how to perform this argument is, what type of interruptions are you capable of doing with madness? What are the ways in which we have to stop ourselves and regroup so that we can listen to the disembodied voices that might be floating on the page or floating outside of the room, right? A question that pieces of our evidence ask, right, is like, how do we hold ourselves accountable to ghosts, disembodied voices, babble, internalized trauma, etc., when we can't really like see it, when we can't really verify that somebody's reality that they're experiencing is real or not? How do we consider the materiality of those experiences? How do we consider what types of demands those voices are leveraging on ourselves, right? And that's kind of how I have started to refigure and change the way that I approach this argument, right? It's kind of speaking from here, speaking from the inside, instead of trying to make a routinized, like academic or like secular or theoretical like disagreement with an affirmative. As well, it is useful to be questioning what can be seen within debate, what we see or what we think we can know simply by reading. The assumption that whenever we all read an argument, we all have the ability to interpret it the same way. Black Madness throws this into question, right? It questions the assumption that we can easily interpret and have the same interpretations when there are things that are foreclosed by sight, when there are things in between the lines of text that we're reading, when the form of a text dictates the kind of content a little bit, and vice versa. These are all questions that Mad Blackness throws into relief and almost kind of encourages you to leave behind, right, in favor of pursuing a different way of evaluating the interstices of anti-Blackness and disability. As well as that is nonlinearity. When I make arguments with Mad Blackness, I go everywhere. At one point, I will be on the overview. At another point, I'll be making a link argument, and then I'll be going back to the overview, go back to the permutation, go back, because there's not a point in which this argument never has a starting point or an end point, right? Mad Blackness does not have a starting point or an end point. It does not have a linear way of trafficking what is being said, and instead tries to bring in a variety of different perspectives to try to culminate in a question of how do we hold ourselves accountable to it, right? How do we render a type of material relationship? And these are questions that are hard to answer in debate. I still have not fully understood how to render these types of conversations material outside of what it literally does to other debaters, how it forces us to, not forces, but, leads to interruptions, even if they don't necessarily resolve the questions that have been forwarded in debate. Something that Terry Pickens says is that Mad Blackness is not resistive or agentive all on its own. And I think that's very true, because this argument doesn't do anything. It doesn't solve anything. It doesn't make the world any better. It doesn't necessarily, we don't even know if it makes the world any worse, but we can trust that it changes the way that we have to think about things getting better or worse, how we think about solving things, who is capable of solving things, etc., that debate has normatively forced us to consider, right? The assumption that there's a status quo, there's a problem, and then the affirmative needs to deviate from it, and the negative either has to prove the status quo is good or that they have a better competing way of dealing with the status quo. And why this is important is because of intramural debates. When debating about anti-Blackness, we tend to have a lot of agreements that debate would not be able to normatively take up. For example, the status quo is anti-Black. Given that, I don't think the negative really wants to defend that the status quo is better than anything a Black person would do to address anti-Blackness. So we will usually give a competitive option, whether it is a policy option, an interpretation of how debate operates, or an alternative, right? But the main point on either side is that the status quo is anti-Black and we need to do something about it. Mad Blackness is like, nah. At least when I make this argument, I'm like, nah, I agree that the status quo is bad. We have some fundamental agreements about it, right? We think that we have unique arguments, but fundamentally everything that's being said is not unique. There's no uniqueness question. The only uniqueness question is who said what and what did the negative say and what does that relationship mean? I think the best way to approach madness, right, is to question what the meaning of things that we cannot normatively see and that we cannot easily interpret, right? And how that throws into relief certain arguments, right? How does that influence what the reason for decision is going to be, and how the other team might change how they think about the world, how they think about arguments, etc., right? As I've made these arguments, I've witnessed debaters change how they talk about madness, how they talk about blackness during the debate to get closer to the argument, right? But the question that Mad Blackness brings up is, why were you even attached to those ideas that like we have to solve something, or that we need to identify a problem in the world, when we don't necessarily have the ability to really deal with it, right? Why do we make demands on each other to improve our capacity to mother, when mothering takes a type of energy that might, not be accessible for all Black people? We might not always be in the like realm of being able to take care of each other as family, and sometimes that care might be violent, right? But those are discussions that we don't get to take up unless we have an alternative solution to it, right? And if we don't have an alternative solution, then there's no point in even addressing it, because it's not unique. Mad Blackness throws that into question, and I'll explain in a little bit how we are able to navigate outside of these uniqueness questions. Similarly, is the framework of presumption as an argument about accommodation, rather than simply saying the other team doesn't do anything, right? Is that we should look at presumption about presuming against the other team as an accommodation, right? Insofar as Black mad subjects and mad Black subjects have to do a lot of work, right? We have to do more in order to get disability recognized, in order to get access to these accommodations, right? We have to, fight for our rights as Black people in general, right? To get people to see things that they already are not able to see, namely anti-Blackness, and get some degree of concession from the state, right, in the form of policy. When it comes to very intramural aspects, when we petition to our caretakers for better care, we have to do the labor of getting them to see what's actually happening, to have them understand. And that's something that takes excess energy. It might be exhausting. It might be fatiguing, right? So the argument of presumption then is not even necessarily about whether the affirmative is able to solve, whether they're able to resolve, but how are they able to approach that when meeting those that need accommodations, that need a different form of materiality? Nonlinear argumentation, I already went over that, as well as non and anti-solvency, right? But I'd also like to talk real quick about norm inversion. What I mean by that is that in debate, we tend to refuse, in intramural debates, we tend to operate outside of particular assumptions about how debate operates, right? Like the norm of competition, the ballot, etc., all come into question. And I think that Mad Blackness begs the question of how well we're actually doing it, right? Frequently, when engaging arguments, we will, or like that we don't know or we don't recognize, we will go back to very specific parts of debate, like competition, and say that debate is a competitive space, right? So we have to negate each other, we have to affirm things. And in particular, we'll use those concepts to critique the other team, right? So the negative is being pathological is pathologizing us because we have to read an affirmative, because that's how debate works, right? Therefore, the negative is anti-Black. I think that Mad Blackness begs the question of, are you really deviating from those norms when you're making arguments like that? Especially when the argument is that, like, you should try to accommodate Black people that have differences from yourself, or you have already taken up the mantle of saying that we should solve a problem. So when we critique you and you say that we're holding you like culpable or we're pathologizing you, it's like a little bit awkward, right? How do we resolve the tension between those things? I think that Mad Blackness throws that into relief and has us move away from competition entirely to situate ourselves in a very specific type of intramural debate. The last couple things I want to say before I read this lyric is that Mad Blackness, it's just a phrase. It's just a phrase that I keep using. I don't think it means anything, really. I probably gave you a lot of meaning in this like past lecture, but I don't really think that the point is to focus on Black madness or mad blackness themselves, but instead that kind of reinterpretation or redefining of our reality when we approach structures that involve sanity, that involve being able to explain yourself rationally, etc. Right? When I was talking about not solving, what mad blackness does is that it begs the question of whether the judge, whether the other team, whether you yourself think that what is happening is able to chart out something that is good, that is able to create something different from the status quo, and whether that in and of itself is something that we should affirm. Whether we should affirm listening to disembodied voices, people that we think are crazy, etc., even if we don't know what's about to happen. And that's why it's not about solvency, it's not about any normative ways of thinking about debate, right? But instead about questioning why we even approach protesting, resistance, etc., through like value statements, through what we can know is going to happen, right? And I think that this lyric, the ways that we experience trauma internally, all point us in that direction if we're willing to listen to it. I know your soul in the dirt. I know your head in the clouds. I know I'm rolling in first. Shout outs for holding me down. Holy, I'm holding the crown. It's funny you know of me now. Hopefully you understand it ain't shade. I just needed a band. Shout out Jody, that's my man. Y'all just needed a plan. Shout out Nikki, that's my dad. You should try running my life. You should try breathing this gas. It's hard trying to get to the future. I found that I needed my path. Why do you stare? Because I'm Black. Thank y'all.
I'm still here. So I'm gonna end the live stream and open it up for questions slash, actually, I'll just talk about this after I end the live stream. And oh, actually, can you move to the host?
Got you.
Awesome, thank you.